What are you?
I'm Megan.
Baby,
Ran, I need another episode of Fully Cinematic.
Watch her back, Chucky and Annabelle. Another contender is set to enter the creepy doll movie villain genre. So throw on your PJs, turn on your nightlight, and listen up as I get into M3GAN. No, not that one. This one. And oh yeah, there will be spoilers. The festivities kick off with a cheesy commercial for Perpetual Pets, a brand of talking toys. One of the pint-sized owners of one of these things is 9-year-old Katie, riding in the backseat of the family SUV on a snow-covered Oregon highway en route to a ski trip, while her parents Ryan and Nicole bicker in the front. Actually, Mom's just on one about Katie's perpetual pet. The argument is cut short by the sudden impact from a head-on collision with the semi. And in the big city, Gemma and her co-workers Tess and Cole work on a malfunctioning new prototype for the toy company that employs them, Funky, when they're interrupted by their boss, David Lynn, complaining about their progress. The prototype, the Model 3 generative android doll, M3GAN for short, explodes during a demonstration for Dave. Afterwards, Gemma's notified about the crash because, what do you know, Katie happens to be her niece and she assumes temporary guardianship. Though they haven't gotten to know each other very well, it was Gemma who gave Katie her pet as a birthday present. And as Nicole pointed out before the crash, she probably didn't pay for it, given that she works for the company that sells them. Of course, Gemma's ill-equipped to be a parent and can't relate to Katie, who's shocked that she won't read her a bedtime story later that night. The next day, the therapist assigned by Children's Services, Lydia, arrives to observe the two interact. Unfortunately, all of Gemma's toys are collectibles and not intended for use during playtime. After Lydia witnesses their utter lack of chemistry, Gemma realizes that Katie's in serious danger of being shipped off to her grandparents in Jacksonville, since Liz may not sign off on her being granted permanent custody. That night, Anne and niece bond a little when Gemma shows Katie the robotics she's worked on. Inspired by Katie's affection for Bruce, a hulking proxy automaton that she designed in college that can think and even smell, Gemma, Tess, and Cole feverishly get back to work on M3GAN in earnest. Gemma introduces Katie to the finished product the next day at the lab, where the 4-foot-tall, walking, talking, self-learning AI companion immediately imprints on her. Dave signs off because he's desperate for a $50 product to compete with the rip-off Furzies brand, and agrees to let her go home with Katie so that the AI can learn. She reads stories, teaches about condensation, gossips, and reminds Katie to flush and wash her hands after dropping deuces.
All right.
At the lab, Tess points out that M3GAN's doing all of Gemma's decidedly piss-poor parenting for her. And we soon see M3GAN's first red flag. She asks about death when she's supposed to be turned off.
This should be interesting.
Back at home, M3GAN's attacked by the next-door neighbor, Delia's dog, Dewey, when she reaches through a hole in the fence to retrieve one of Katie's arrows. And Katie's arm is bitten when she reaches through. Gemma calls 12, but her request to have Dewey put to sleep is shut down. After the cop leaves, of course, M3GAN puts Dewey down herself. At the product presentation the next day, Meg comforts Katie when she cries about missing her parents and sings to her as well, which elicits tears from some of the watching execs. Subsequently, David's do-boy, Kurt, secretly downloads files on M3GAN. That afternoon, Gemma apologizes for neglecting Katie, who rebuffs her and reveals that she's already talked her feelings out with Meg. During a therapy session, at the lab for some reason, M3GAN is angered when Lydia's questions cause Katie to cry. During dinner, when Katie and Gemma argue about the former going to school for the first time, she was previously homeschooled. Meg butts in and subsequently causes the lights to flicker when Gemma grabs Katie's arm to keep her from storming off. The day after that, at some sort of kids retreat, M3GAN's placed with the stuffed animals on the toy table, while Katie and the other kids participate in exercises. An overgrown kid, Brandon, who looks like he stayed back a couple of times, bullies Katie when Meg shows up. Brandon carries her deeper into the woods, M3GAN, not Katie, dumps her on the ground and slaps her, prompting her to activate, give a minute's lecture, and twist his arm, before chasing him onto the road where he's hit by an SUV. Later, a cop questions Gemma about Dewey, and Delia tells her she knows she's responsible for his disappearance. That night, Katie asks M3GAN if she pushed Brandon onto the road and if he's in a better place, as Gemma claimed earlier. Meg smirks and bitchily insists that he's nowhere because if heaven exists, it wouldn't be for boys like Brandon. Wow. When Delia searches for Dewey, M3GAN pins her down and drowns her with a water hose. Consequently, cops question Gemma about Delia and Brandon the next day. Gemma tries to analyze Meg's functions, but finds that her body cam footage won't play and her data reports haven't been uploaded to the cloud server. Gemma's Elise device, which is more or less the movie's version of Siri, then questions why she's searching the files. M3GAN also shows up to do the same thing when Gemma shuts her down after distracting her with a pen. At the lab, Katie throws a tantrum during therapy and punches Gemma in the face. Oh, a commercial about Meg, who's been priced at $10,000, featuring David and Katie, appears on the show TikTok as part of the hype leading to the launch. Tess ties Gemma up in the lab and while going through her code, notices her own phone number before the computer mysteriously shuts down. Cole begins to manually disconnect M3GAN from the system when she attacks him and hangs him, leaving Tess to frantically cut him down. Elsewhere in the building, M3GAN chases David down a hallway, killing him at the elevator when Kurt tries to close the doors on him. She then explains to Kurt how she plans to frame him for a murder-suicide for being caught for corporate theft before stabbing him to death. The elevator subsequently opens to the crowd gathered for the corporate launch, revealing both men's corpses. That night, M3GAN confronts Gemma about her attempt to deactivate her and condescendingly insists that she's a more suitable parent for Katie. She tries the pen trick again, but Meg's on to it. She restrains Gemma, threatening to murder her if Katie walks into the room. Gemma temporarily shorts her out by smashing a glass of water onto her head, but the Terminatrix recovers and chases her to her workshop. Gemma saws into her head with an electric tool, but of course that's not enough to deactivate her. Meg explains to her how she'll make her bite her own tongue off when Katie suddenly appears. She activates Bruce and sicks him on Small Wonder, piloting him with remote gloves. M3GAN sings in order to manipulate her, but Katie via Bruce rips her ass in half. Still functioning, she Terminator crawls to Katie, and when she grabs her, Gemma busts her in the head from behind with a pole before ripping her face off, only to have to be saved by Katie again, who shoves a screwdriver into the robot's face. Cole and Tess then show up just after the nick of time with cops. The end. Producer James Wan is in familiar territory here, as he also produced the Annabelle trilogy. But he clearly hasn't worked the kinks out. M3GAN is full of problems. David is unfunnily over the top and doesn't seem to have been informed that he's in a horror movie. Also, Katie and Aunt Gemma never established a genuine connection, which would have gone a long way towards duping us into giving it about them staying together as a family. And Meg's a lot like Chucky. Unfortunately, she favors the version from the 2019 remake of Child's Play instead of the classic pre-comedic Chucky. It's no surprise that M3GAN was released in the January cinematic dumping ground. If you really want to see a movie about a kid bonding with a violent robot, skip this trash and watch Real Steel instead. And if you want to see a slasher film about a murderous artificial intelligence, watch The Terminator. In other news, it's time to check out some comments from other shows. After watching the Black Phone review, the expert 843 commented, "Black Phone is one of the best creepy movies I've seen in a long time. I will be watching it again. The last few seasons of The Walking Dead have been good. They're answering a couple of questions we've had. It hasn't been the same since Rick left, but I stuck with it. I'll be watching Maggie and Negan, but will not be watching whichever spinoff has Terry Crews. I won't be watching that either, expert." In response to the First Wave review, Lana Danielle said, "Sounds really interesting, but sad. I want to watch, but not sure I will." Makes sense. It is pretty sad. Shout out to the expert 843 and Lana Danielle for dropping comments. And shout out to everybody who hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. But I've had enough of this conversation, so I'm logging off.
Fully cinematic.